made the jump feet first. It was deep water. And as soon as I hit the water, it was like I got hit by a stun gun. And no pain, totally conscious, but I was frozen, couldn't move. I had been paralyzed from the neck down. The first thing I was thinking about was surviving because I was underwater for a while. I was, no exaggeration, probably a few seconds away from drowning before they turned me over. And the first thing I said was, I'm awake, because I thought, people thought that I was unconscious.
Chris is the founder of NeuroHope, which is a specialized healthcare provider that helps people who have had spinal cord injuries recover and really go through a pretty miraculous type of journey that is aligned with what Chris was able to do through his perseverance. Now, I'll offer a little bit of context for our relationship, but would love to have you fill in the story from your perspective. So Chris is a high performer and was an excellent student, came into a business that I had co-founded, which was called Cha Cha. It was a cool business and we grew really fast, and Chris was part of that story. He was one of our young team members. He was in his 20s at the time, and Chris went out for a fun trip with some buddies, as I recall.
So fortunate to be alive, I didn't drown in that moment, but then your life changes. They airlifted me to Methodist Hospital in downtown Indianapolis and started to recognize the reality of the situation was that there was very little likelihood that I would ever regain any bit of movement, paralyzed from the neck down.
So when you were admitted and you were stable, was there a physician that came in and explained that to you?
Yeah, right off the bat, there was some barrages of tests, and they knew it was a spinal cord injury. So I went to the MRI immediately. And I mean, I was a lifeguard before I got hurt. I knew what had happened too. I knew when I was laying there on the beach that it was bad. And it's a very surreal moment. It took a while for the shock to wear off. It didn't really hit me until I really woke up out of surgery the next morning. And then everything kind of rushed back, and you're staring at this reality of your life's over. I think so within the first couple days of my injury, I started getting a little bit of sensation and a little bit of trace movement back. And I guess I want to preface by saying every spinal cord injury, every brain injury, every stroke, everything neurologically related, it's like a snowflake. Every injury is different. No recovery is the same. But the constant there is that every single one needs an incredibly long amount of time for rehabilitation. And I think in those first early days, I started getting a little bit of movement back, and I would really just gravitate to that. It would show me that there was something making its way through that injury on my spinal cord. So I said, okay,
So you found some hope. You thought, okay, this is happening. I can feel these sensations. I can get better. You started to have some optimism.
Yeah. And that's all I could really grasp. That and the amazing support I had from friends and family that kind of really flooded the hospital and the rehabilitation hospital in those first several months. But it's scary because you don't know if that's all you're going to get back. But the first couple weeks, I remember I could flex the interior, and I could flex my quads. And that's all I could do. But it showed me that, yeah, there was some communication there. Okay, there's some hope there.
That's this amazing entrepreneurial success story. But to today, you now have a thriving business that you operate called NeuroHope that is both supported through donations as well as about half of it is actually paid for through insurance like CMS, Medicare. And there's still a lot of work to do, but you've gone from a young, everything is possible. And I remember you were super athletic. I remember that about you. You were really into being out doing things and fitness, and then all of a sudden that all changes overnight. And not only did you persevere through to recovery for yourself, but you went on a personal mission to go create a better model for all of these other people that have these life-changing traumatic events, which is so incredibly inspiring.
So I did it for about 17 years before starting this venture fund, Oakwood Circle Ventures. I think my healthcare journey really started from my dad. He was in the pharmaceutical industry my whole life. So I watched him and got exposure to healthcare for a long time through his work. When I started at Bank of America, I was a generalist. I did a lot of deals in a lot of different industries, some of which were in healthcare. And that's when I really started to understand the business side of healthcare. obviously it's a very important industry to everyone, both personally and to their families. So I always knew it was important, but I never really kind of thought about the business aspects. But then when I really started to see how these healthcare companies operate and how they could be good business models, make profits, be good for their shareholders and stakeholders, but also actually do good for society, I thought that that was really inspiring compared to some other industries where a lot of times it was just about, potentially making a buck, or they weren't quite adding value into society like a positive healthcare company could. I mean, I think everybody knows that it's one of our biggest industries. It's so important to everybody, again, personally and to their families. It's one of our most costly industries from a GDP perspective. I mean, $4 trillion plus to spend, really important sector in our overall economy. Yet it's just so poorly run. It's inefficient. It's slow to move. Adoption of technology is so far behind other industries. I've really started to notice all the problems that our industry is ripe with over many years. And I've seen throughout my career in advising young entrepreneurs, young companies, helping them think through their capital, their M&A activity for many years, that there's a lot of great solutions out there. But having those solutions actually make an impact in this complex ecosystem is really challenging. And I became passionate about helping these companies try to find a way to actually kind of untangle some of this complex web or the pretzel, however you want to describe it, that our healthcare industry is. So eventually I created Oakwood Circle Ventures to do a couple of things. One is to invest in these companies. So capital is always going to be important. You're going to need capital to grow, scale, make a bigger impact, but really try to be a strategic partner to these companies and support them in any way I can with things I've learned along the way, things my partners have learned along the way, to support them with the right guidance, networks, and open the right doors for them to really try to make an impact in this ecosystem.
How does the business of healthcare work? And can you recall some light bulbs turning on in terms of just fundamentally how the business works of healthcare? Because I think that's one of the hardest parts, is to truly grasp something that's such a different model than any other industry. It's the least rational probably of any industry.
Yeah, I think what's really unique about healthcare is the consumer of the service is generally not the one paying for it. It's generally paid for by a third party, insurance. A lot of times it's the government, which makes it a really interesting kind of supply demand or transactional environment where generally you, the consumer, I want to buy something. The money's coming out of my own pocket to purchase that.
Even further to that point, you as the consumer aren't necessarily even deciding which thing you want to buy.
Oh, sure.
So I hadn't ever really thought about it this way, but it's almost like, imagine that you were walking into a mall and there was this invisible force that brought you to the store that it wanted you to be in, and then told you the thing that you were going to get off the shelf. But then there was some other thing that paid for it.
Doesn't matter if it's your style. Those are your pants, and hey, we're going to pay for it. Okay.
You can be bursting at the seams in the pants.
Exactly. So yeah, it makes it a really unique industry as opposed to most other industries. Again, the buyer and the seller are directly transacting with each other. And I think that's one of the reasons why healthcare has been so slow to innovate, is because there's a lack of consumerism and a lack of consumer choice, where I'm capitalist. I believe in free markets.
And that has resulted already in 5 investments. What are the things that you really are keying in on when you decide to invest in something? I bet you've seen 500 things.
Sure. Yeah.
You chose
fair.
5.
Yeah. I hate to be generic, but I just say innovation. I just think it's so important, where a lot of the companies we've invested, or the companies I've been really attracted to, are the ones that are truly innovating and understanding the problem, understanding that they have a solution to that problem that's differentiated, makes a difference. It brings things like access, things like engagement, things like navigation, things like better data liquidity, things that are proactive versus reactive. These are a lot of the legacy problems in the healthcare ecosystem. I think the companies that have been really attractive to us are the ones that understand some of those themes and actually know how to make an impact on those themes. Well said. Yeah, exactly. So whether it's things like, we don't know how to engage with our member population, our patient population, and we all know insurance companies want to better engage with their members to have them do things that are healthier, keep them out of the hospital, longer term health and well-being for those members. Health systems want to engage with their patients, because they want them to go to them as the first resource for for whenever they have healthcare needs. So everybody's trying to engage with these consumers, and it's really challenging to do that. So a solution that can figure out how to engage with these members in the right way, I think is just one example of they see the problem with, hey, everybody wants to engage. We don't know how to do it. We've got the right mousetrap to get these patients or members to engage with us in the right way. And in that case, I think everybody wins.
Start out just why you in healthcare? How did you make it into this space? And what are you thinking the next steps are for you to innovate and bring the value of healthcare to more people?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I actually started off in a career track, if you will, that was much similar to what I just experienced out there on Indy Motor Speedway. I was a mechanical engineer. I was doing industrial engineering for automotive and aerospace applications. Actually got the ability to have a department, a P&L and all that, and didn't even know what P&L stood for back then, honestly.
Did you guess? Did you hazard a guess?
The boss put it on he's like, "This is your P&L." I said, what's P&L? And he's like, "Manage to this." And I said, okay. And then, as I got further into that, realized that the business side of what I was doing was much more interesting. So I left engineering, got an MBA, long story short, interned at a company I think we've all heard of, Quest Diagnostics, and realized, engineering and manufacturing and industrial, aspects of that was very akin to the lab world. And it was all about scale, right, and building efficiency. And as many of us do, we all have, family members that have been impacted by, whatever it may be, cancer or other diseases. And so you start to, even in like finance, corporate development, you start to really have the ability to help change outcomes, change lives. And something I feel very strongly about is lowering the cost of healthcare. And making it as affordable as possible. And scale, for example, is kind of one way to do that. So over the course of the last 10 or 15 years, really had the ability to put my fingerprint, even in a corporate dev setting, to have that impact on the space.
So there are a lot of partnerships that have happened over the years between independent commercial labs and health systems.
Yeah.
And then how do you envision plugging that into healthcare delivery so that the lab is more strategic in helping to prevent these terrible things that are costly and obviously also harm the patient?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a big part of the value prop, I think, in working with a laboratory that does this all day, every day, right, is to bring those insights and those analytics around, whether it be CKD or other chronic diseases, to say, hey, whether it's your health plan or just the provider network in general, let us create this feedback loop for you to say, there's obviously your health plan is probably top of mind when they think about that, but there's ways to really leverage the tools that we have around population health to really steer and manage outcomes in a more efficient way. And like you said, the criticality of having that embedded data in a way that's easily digestible. I mean, we were talking about yesterday, right? Clinicians are bogged down with however many things throughout their day. Like, it needs to be seamless and it needs to be, interoperable, whatever the term may be. So we're working strongly with partners like HC1, for example, of how do we embed the analytics and the insights in a way that's as digestible as possible, and in a way that really provides actionable, real time ability to manage care.
Yeah, it's interesting, the example of identifying the need, but then having it somehow prompt action, some kind of intervention. That's the last mile that matters, that delivers on the value proposition. I know one of the examples of that I've been really excited about that was created by our team is focused on anemia specifically. And not many people realize this, but a substantial double-digit percentage of people who go in for surgery are actually anemic.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that's a significant complicating factor in their outcome. And so if you have to transfuse them to solve the problem immediately,
sure,
that's a liquid organ transplant. And introduces a lot of potential risk. It's obviously a lot of cost as well. And so in this case with anemia, there's actually a connection into all of the scheduling for all the patients that are going to be having surgery, or whichever segment of the surgery population the health system partner wants to focus on. But then if you think about how somebody's anemic, it's based on a laboratory test.
A very simple one too.
Very simple one. And so you can run that test. You can find out proactively with enough lead time that they can then have an infusion therapy, which actually is appropriately chargeable service by the healthcare provider. So it generates revenue instead of just being a cost on the blood side, and it makes it so the patient outcome is much better. And that's just a simple example of how lab and the insight from lab gets integrated into care delivery more broadly. And to zoom out, I have been on this sort of giving speeches all across the country and looking to try to get people to focus on this bigger picture of what is healthcare really about. And it's really about longevity. It's about living the longest life that you can and as healthy as possible. And in order to do that, we've got to start being more preventative and more proactive, and we've got to also start connecting the dots between these different areas. Lab insight can actually transform the way all of healthcare gets delivered. If you just focused, if you think about this question of there's so many things you could do, but what's the one thing that by doing that thing, it makes everything else easier or unnecessary? I would contend that implementing a strategic program that's truly integrated with the lab across all of care delivery, you start to realize some major, major benefits. And I think about the example of CKD that we talked about as a tip of the spear, but let's think about a longer range issue of cognitive decline and all the people that are developing Alzheimer's and the fact that you now have medications that can slow that progression. Really excited about today's topic, which is about the use of subspecialized pathologists in better diagnosing and treating cancer. We've got one of the top leaders of the lab industry here with us in the studio, Steve Sirota. Steve, thanks for being here.
I appreciate it.
So Steve is with a few organizations, but I don't know which one to say is his day job, but they're all very related. And it's just super cool to see an innovator like this out there running what is the largest lab in Wisconsin. So as president and COO of Wisconsin Diagnostic Labs and chief lab officer of Freighter ThedaCare Health, and also CEO of more of an early stage business, Adelon, Steve really leverages experience that he's gained from a variety of previous innovators, including Northwestern Medicine and Rush University Medical Center, to kind of bring what I see as the state of the art of laboratory medicine to the benefit of patients.
Yeah, and that's been really the focus from the beginning, right? If we can bring the best and the brightest and the most cutting edge innovation right to the patient's bedside and to meet the patient where they need to be, that's the ideal. At the end of the day, it's all about how do we improve care and how do we get patients what they need when they need it.
And a lot of times people lose sight of that, especially when you talk about labs, where people don't talk about labs very much, but pretty much every patient journey that involves a diagnosis includes lab information.
The idea here is how do we get the best expert possible connected with the patient to be able to make sure that we're working together in the right way with the right subset of data to be able to create the best intelligent care plan to help a patient through their course of disease. And I think it is incredibly underappreciated just how valuable it is to have someone with really deep expertise in the specific subtype of cancer or sub-disease state that you're dealing with. And what we see mostly today, and this is partially because of ignorance, lack of engagement largely, and frankly speaking, the lack of availability, a lot of folks are getting treated by generalists. Not that they don't do a good job. In most instances, they do a fantastic job, but aren't ever getting that added benefit of having a subspecialist evaluate their specific condition, their specimens, to ensure that when we're creating these care plan designs, they're being created with the best possible data as a foundation.
So for example, if an individual is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer,
Yes.
there's a pathologist that has trained and is
Specific.
specialized in that type.
With board certification.
Okay.
And what's important to think about with that is I always equate it to home maintenance and care, right? When you've got a pipe that bursts in your wall, you don't call an electrician, you call a plumber. And there's a rational reason why you do that. That's an individual who has a depth of knowledge in that specific subspecialty, and they're going to be able to more accurately, more quickly, and more effectively take care of the problem. And it's the exact same thing in laboratory medicine. If you can engage a generalist to help lay the table, to help support care of patients at a baseline level, and then when the instance calls for it, have the appropriate access to a board-certified subspecialty pathologist, you're going to get the right diagnosis, you're going to get the right information necessary to develop a really high-value clinical care plan that's going to lead to a better.
So you were talking earlier when we were just catching up about some of the really promising ways to treat some of these catastrophically scary types of cancer. And I was listening with great interest because it's exciting what's happening. Would you mind sharing what you were telling me about the pancreatic cancer example?
So what we're starting to see now is new medications being approved with new applicability. And one of the ones that we just recently got FDA clearance was Pluvicto, which can be used now pre-chemo. And those sort of changes in indication for medication can have monumental impact on the course of care for patients. And while, certainly I am not an expert in that specific subspecialty, what I can tell you is what's really exciting about that is this is the idea about meeting that nexus of innovation and data being put together to make sure that when we're treating patients, we've got all options on the table, and that when we're making decisions about where and how to treat those patients, we're doing so with comprehensive, clean data that allows everybody to work together collectively to create an optimal outcome. And classically speaking, the ability to access Pluvicto pre-chemo hadn't existed because of outside of clinical trial.
And is this the medication approach you were talking about that used some type of like a targeting? To go directly to the bad cells?
And with that specifically, there's an entire subsegment of medicine, theranostics, which really has, in my opinion, I think has a real opportunity to be the cutting edge way that we treat cancer for many instances. And that is by tying together laboratory medicine, specifically the use of radiopharmaceuticals and imaging. So we can get a real clean understanding of the conditions that exist inside of a patient at a given moment. We can target treatment, and then we can track the progress of that care. And by being able to do all of those things, we're really starting to get to a place where we're personalizing medicine in a meaningful way that yields better outcomes.
And we're going to be talking some about AI and data and the opportunities and challenges that exist for a nonprofit type of health system like David's. But thanks for being here, David.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Part of the reason we connected the dots for our Healthcare Innovation Summit with the Indy Motor Speedway is it's all about high performance, and it's all about how do you go from operating at kind of a level that isn't fast enough and isn't good enough, and tuning the knobs until you can really win. And it was interesting, in our trivia we heard that it was 74 miles an hour was the average speed of the Indy car in the very first race, and now the speed is like in the 234.
It's crazy
on average for a winner of the Indy 500. I draw the comparison in healthcare. I think that's, in many respects, we're at this like horse and buggy pace right now, and that needs to change in order to improve things for everybody, and the patients, but also the clinicians. Yesterday, that was a huge theme with everybody talking about data. And I know you and I were talking earlier about this whole idea of data brokers. And, as a health system or any kind of provider, you need likely to have some external expertise to help navigate how you can take advantage of that. And also, I think it was touched on staying true to the mission of delivering better patient care.
Right.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on where do you go as a nonprofit health system that clearly there's no margin, there's no mission, and also you want to make sure that you're doing right by how this information and insight is deployed.
So I think that's well put, and it's something that we all kind of have a responsibility to do, is to at least have a passing understanding of the new world and the changing landscape around data. I'm not a data scientist, but we face a lot of headwinds in our organization, like probably everybody out here does. And like it or not, this is the horses out of the barn. There's no changing what's about to happen. So I think being educated in best how to approach the challenges we're about to face through AI, kind of its use in general, but particularly in healthcare, we need to be prepared for how to understand that as well as we can, whether it's your purview or not.
But then you start moving into this realm of, what do you do about artificial intelligence? Because there's a lot of, it's not really regulated, and maybe it shouldn't be, maybe it should be, who really knows? But I'd be curious to get your point of view and even some stories or examples of where do you see AI, one, being regulated within your healthcare system in terms of the decisions on what's going to be used and what's not going to be used, and then give us an example of, hey, here's a place where we're starting to see this actually take hold.
Yeah. So I think when we were in our meetings yesterday and you had, the McDonald Hopkins folks that speak a little bit to the compliance side of it and the regulatory aspect, you're starting to see new laws come into place. In our state, in the state of Washington, we have consumer health data laws now that are helping people control the use, the sale of the data. So that type of regulation, I think, will only increase state by state over time until maybe even nationally to some degree. The use case is dependent on subjectivity to, of course, who you are, what your needs are, what you're looking to accomplish. But from our perspective, we have actually, since 2017, we've been involved in a couple of we did a pilot with a company called Exelis. That's an appeals, streamlining the appeals process through AI. And
Appeals for payments?
yeah,
With
for
insurance?
appropriate reimbursement. Yeah.
Okay.
So we started with them in 2017, and then there's another company called Tuva that we have a venture arm that's part of our Connected Care group that invested in this organization that's actually an open source platform for data.
It's a pitiful act. So this is an area that clearly, though, needs to be better. And in the case that you're talking about, is this actually helping patients because it's helping to make sure that things that should be covered are covered? Or is it helping the health system more because it's,
Great question.
I'm curious.
Yeah, it's a great question. So no, but not because the intent isn't there to eventually get there, but from an initial perspective, it's really process related. It's organizational in nature. So I think that's what you're seeing a lot across the AI spectrum right now, whether it's in healthcare or not, is there's a lot of walking before running. And even when I ask questions of people who are subject matter experts, they seem to hesitate to go beyond like scribing or scheduling or things that are really just process related versus things that are more predictive analytics and things that you can apply to the real world for true change. But I think maybe people are fearful that the proper restrictions aren't in place yet to actually take that next step. And that, I think it's okay to be cautious with AI. I think to move slow is probably wise at this point.
Right now, that technology is helping to make things more efficient, so you don't need so many people to do so much work.